Hello, Michael.
Hello, Carl. How are you doing today?
Things are very good. There's signs of spring that we made it.
So
We
is
made it
it
through another hard winter.
is that a very sad thing for you being in Utah because that means ski season is ending?
There's a mix. About this time, I think it's why we have seasons is because about this time I'm like I'm ready to ride my mountain bike. Like
Okay.
it's good. And then it snows. I'm like, "Oh, good, one more."
Okay.
So it's kind of that mix.
Because you're not leaving the mountains and the outdoors. You're just going to flip from skiing to mountain biking. Or
Yeah, for
mountain
sure.
skiing to mountain biking.
Yeah,
Okay.
we just hope that the mud season isn't very long. That's the
Okay.
problem is when you
So I
can't
guess
ski
that's
or
neither
mountain
good for
bike.
skiing or biking. Okay.
Exactly. Things are good. Speaking, wow, we've had so many of these little, what do we call these? Entrees? Or what do
Okay.
we?
So did we queue you up for
Yeah,
whatever you
environments,
want to dig into today?
navigating terrain,
Okay.
navigating
That's the
terrain.
actual theme, navigating terrain. Okay.
Well, yeah, I'm really curious. So, if uh, I see a lot of challenges. I've had a lot of challenges myself, and I see a lot of challenges in both the work we do with clients, because it involves the human called the client, it involves the collection of humans called markets and economies,
Okay.
and then we've got our own businesses to run too. So we've got all,
That too.
and I've seen a lot of challenges in navigating and making decisions that come from misunderstanding the terrain you're navigating, right? Like if you don't
Okay.
understand the landscape, and I understand this needs a little bit of explanation or context.
Yeah.
If so, I want to talk about one specific subset of ways to get clear about the terrain that you're navigating or the landscape that you're navigating.
Mhm.
There's lots of ways we could look at this. We could look at it through complexity theory. So we could look at simple, complicated, complex, or chaos landscapes. And I think we've talked a little bit about it in the past, and I'm sure we'll do it again. But today I wanted to talk about this concept, which I just love because I think the phrasing and it comes from like it's really fun when you find academic work that uses fun language.
Okay.
So I love this idea of wicked and kind
Okay.
learning environments. Wicked
Okay.
and kind learning environments. How have you familiar with those terms?
Um, I went to school in New England, so we use wicked a lot, but it probably has a different meaning than what you're talking about here. So I think we need more
Let's talk about this.
context.
One place to if people are curious about this, you can read David Epstein did a great job of talking about this in his book Range.
Okay.
But let's give a little description. In a kind learning environment, the rules are clear,
Okay.
feedback is immediate, and patterns repeat.
Okay.
So you could think of like chess and even checkers would be an even kinder learning environment,
Okay.
right? Tennis,
Okay.
like maybe even golf,
Patterns
maybe.
mostly repeat.
Yeah, yeah.
They tell me they'll repeat if I hit the ball the same way. I swear a hand
Yeah.
go the same
In
place,
in
but
a
I
in a
get the
wi
principle.
yeah, in a wicked environment, you just sort of get the flip of each of those. The rules are ambiguous, so the rules are unclear. Feedback is delayed or misleading, and I want to give you an example of this from backcountry skiing, actually. And your experience can actually reinforce the wrong lesson.
Feel like, isn't this, don't we usually just call this life?
Yeah, yeah, which is why I think it's so important because there are parts of our lives that are kind. There are parts of our businesses that are kind. There are parts of our interactions with clients that are kind, and there are parts that are wicked. And if you're mistaken about which one you're in, you tend to use the wrong tools. So let me give you an example. Like in if you ski in avalanche terrain, so outside of the resort
Okay.
where nobody's taking care of you, like it's your job to decide if it's safe you often get what's called non-event feedback. So you go do something and nothing bad happens. So there was no event.
So I ski off terrain or whatever, however the words are. I ski
Yeah,
outside of the boundaries as I'm obviously not a skier.
yeah.
Like I ski out of bounds and nothing bad happens. I have like a great run down the slope.
Yeah, let's say you ski some really steep slope that's big and open. You get to the bottom, it was amazing, and you think you've done something smart and safe.
Hmm.
When that's just because the feedback was, first of all, the rules were ambiguous. You didn't know what the rules were. Second, the feedback was delayed or misleading, meaning you didn't even. And so when you get down, and this happens all the time with my kids' friends, 24, 25-year-old, mainly male, mainly male in their attitude, because they'll say, like, what are you talking about, old man? That was totally safe. I've skied it 10 times. Nothing happened. Well, that's actually reinforcing
Hmm.
bad behavior. And so I think this I
Because the idea is it's still avalanche territory, and the next run
you just got lucky.
could be a catastrophe, even though nothing happened the past 10 times in a row.
Yeah, you just got lucky. And
Okay.
my proposition to you is financial planning isn't chess, it's avalanche terrain. So I want to talk about that a little bit. That financial planning, people's lives, much of financial planning,
Yeah.
people's lives, the markets, is a wicked learning environment. Things change. And I want to talk about this right now because so many things are changing. And we can talk about this in terms of the financial planning we do for clients, or we can talk about it about how we're running our own businesses.
Well,
Both I think are interesting.
yeah, I mean, both. I mean, my head goes to directions in both, right? From the planning end. I mean, you said earlier, right? Like, wicked environments was it the rules are ambiguous, feedback is not fast, and
Or
sometimes
misleading.
experience reinforces the wrong lessons. I'm like, yeah, so like life, where
Right,
like the
right,
rules are ambiguous, you often don't
right,
get clear feedback, and
right.
sometimes your experience reinforces something that was not actually the right lesson to learn. I mean, I seriously, like, I feel like a part of that is feedback. Sorry, a part of that is life, and I mean, I really do feel like a non-trivial amount of like what I end up doing with the client is trying to help them unlearn lessons they think they learned that weren't,
Hmm.
feedback they thought they got that wasn't, right.
Hmm. Can you think of an
I
example?
yeah, I I bought this tech stock and it went to the moon. I'm a freaking stock picking genius.
For sure. For sure.
Or pick
Isn't
a
that
crypto
interesting
coin
how,
if you pick a crypto coin of your choice right now.
Mhm.
Like, I'm a brilliant investor because I put my money in one of these things and it's gone to the moon. And so I'm a brilliant investor, and the advisor that tells me not to buy it is an idiot who doesn't know what they're talking about, because this person has not gotten any negative feedback that comes in a bear market, and their experience of only being successful with the particular attempts they made may be their skill, or maybe them unable to distinguish between luck. I'm not
yeah.
particularly trying to take a swing at a particular tech stock or crypto coin, but I think like we've all had enough experiences with clients where like someone has struck it wealthy by putting all their money into one of these things and having it go amazingly well, and now have that has crafted their worldview around what the terrain is, right? I'm trying to take this back to your language. Like, they think they're operating in a kind, safe terrain, and it's like, or you just ski down avalanche country and happened to not get an avalanche. It doesn't actually make you a brilliant skier at navigating avalanche terrain. You might have just gotten lucky that nothing knocked loose today.
Yeah. So let's just talk about the tools if you're in a kind learning environment. Um, how do the tools you use change?
I feel like
In fact, it might go ahead.
kind's
What?
easier. Like, the rules are clear. Like, you did a thing, it didn't go well. We all agree we're not going to do that again, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And how much of the work that we do, because there's plenty of work that we do, I think, could be categorized that way. Like rules are pretty clear, right? Feedback's pretty clear. I mean, I'm almost thinking as I'm saying this out loud is tax.
yeah, that's where my was going. Like, file your taxes. Here are certain tax strategies that just are valid, right? The rules are clear. The feedback is immediate. You file your return, you get the tax savings. You do it wrong, you get the nasty gram from the IRS. Like it's you do it every year. Always the pattern repeats. Like you do it every year, and
Yeah, yeah,
strategy works. Like we do it with all our clients, and the strategy works.
yeah.
So yeah, I a lot of tax. I mean, I think tax planning particularly fits that well. But I feel like uh a lot of what we do in planning to me kind of fits that framework around the advice we give. I guess the only asterisk, something like feedback is not always immediate. Sometimes that's challenging, right? Like trust me, diversification's a good idea. A little bit challenging in wicked environments because the feedback is delayed. And in the short term, clients like, why didn't you on more of the thing that went up and none of the
Yeah,
thing that went
yeah,
down?
literally a hallmark, right?
Because
Like misleading feedback.
yeah, tax planning is a kind environment and investment management is a wicked environment.
Yeah, it's interesting too. There was a great example, as I think it was in Range, but I may have read it somewhere else, where there was a study, and as I recall, it was a Rice University study around accounting, which was interesting, that
Mm.
experienced accountants were asked to study a new tax law for deductions that replaced a previous one. They did worse than novices. And this is an interesting problem, which I'm just really curious about. And I haven't read the whole study, so I'm just like, but what it's pointing to is this idea of the study's author called it cognitive entrenchment.
Well, if I got a strategy that works, I keep doing the strategy that works. Don't mess with my strategy. Or I
Totally.
mean,
So
I
how
say
do we
like
deal?
half
How do
joking,
we
half
deal with
serious. Like I got a strategy, it works. Don't mess with my strategy.
that?
Thank you, IRS, federal government, Doge, whatever it is. Like don't mess with my tax strategy. I got a thing, it works. I do it with my clients. They love it.
Yeah, yeah, until it doesn't. And how do we maintain flexibility around that? Is that because it feels to me like we're increasingly we need to almost operate as if we're in a complex, or they're not exactly
Well,
synonymous, so I shouldn't use
more
it that way, but in a wicked environment.
I'm like, yes, except if all you do is spend all your time like, waiting for the bad things to happen, you can lose out on a lot of good opportunity by not just like doing the thing that works and systematizing the heck out of it and building
Yeah,
and scaling it up. Like I mean
yeah.
you may be shifting a little bit from the financial planning end to the business end. Like, most great businesses get built because there's a particular thing they do that they're really good at
Hmm.
and they just stick with it, right? Like, what's his name wrote the whole one thing book. Like, the literal point is find the thing you're good at and do that, right? Jim Collins is
Right,
the hedgehog concept. Like,
right, right.
so much of business success comes down to finding the thing you're good at and doing it repeatably. And it's like, yes, every now and then a business has a Kodak moment, including literally Kodak. I'm like, yes, they also had a wonderfully successful business for like 50 years and made billions and billions of dollars. So,
Yeah,
they could have been super hyper vigilant about everything and they never would have gotten blindsided in a Kodak moment because they never would have been a successful company in the first place.
I love that. Love that.
It
It's just to me, it's really interesting. So let's pretend for a minute, like, where are things particularly wicked?
investments. I mean, to
Would
me, it's
you,
like that's where it comes. Right? Just
yeah,
feedback is delayed. The rules are ambiguous.
yeah.
Feedback is delayed.
How about client income?
Experience can reinforce the wrong lessons.
Do you feel like that's getting increasingly sort of uncertain and maybe even wicked on like how do I make my money? Is my job secure? Is my job safe? Like, do you feel like any of that's shifting for you?
Well, I live in the DC area, so we have a lot of that
Yeah,
right
tough
now.
question. Yeah,
As Doge
yeah,
does what's doing. So yes, I mean I think right, economy, when the economy is struggling and hiring rates and down and unemployment rate is up, I mean that I think there's always a cycle of that just economically speaking as like the citizen of a country. Uh
yeah.
I I'm wondering though where you take this in terms of like, so what are we supposed to do
Yeah.
as advisors with clients? Again, I feel like there's a little bit of a distinction even between the, you know, what do I do as a financial planner and what do I do as a financial planning business owner?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I will admit, at least from the business owner end, I'm like, if you're in a kind environment, just do the thing that works and scale it up. And you at least
Yeah.
need to watch for when the environment might be shifting so you know when to change. But preparing for change that isn't coming just gives up on a lot of opportunity to systematize and grow and scale a business.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff we could talk about in terms of what do you do. And I think I do want to emphasize the idea that, and this was often the case with my column, I'm okay with asking really good questions and not having all the answers because I don't have them. And I think it's fun to just explore. Because even in that case, it's really interesting. If you're operating in a wicked environment, and this is, I think, basically the premise of Epstein's book Range. If you're operating in a wicked environment, being a generalist is really valuable, right? Because you don't get that cognitive entrenchment. You're able to see trends. You're able to
Yeah.
move and change. If you're operating in a kind environment, specializing is really valuable,
Yep.
right? And I think I was thinking about that as I thought about this as a topic. I was thinking about just like niche marketing, like being a specialist, solving a specific problem, building your whole business around
Mhm.
even the service models and everything around solving that specific specialized problem.
Well, and it's a good example in context because as I look at the just like our advisor marketplace, uh most advisors are afraid to build niches for some version of wicked environment. What if I go after them and then the environment changes and I can't serve them anymore? And most of the firms that I know that have grown wildly successful grew with niches by saying the environment's not that wicked. It's actually pretty kind. Find the people you're good at and repeat on
So
them
yeah,
and grow a
really
great
good.
business. And it turns out if the environment changes later, like it's not a life sentence. You
Yeah,
can you can adapt. And ironically, it's actually a lot easier to adapt in many ways when you add a core segment of clients that you grew very successful with and you just literally have more money and team and resources to make
yeah,
the adjustment when the adjustment comes, right? I mean, the irony even in the context of, the infamy of the Kodak moment, Kodak made the first digital camera.
right.
They had the resources. They just couldn't get out of their own way, not because it wasn't successful to scale up in a kind environment, but because they didn't appreciate when eventually it turned to a more wicked environment and other people were doing the same thing and their risks were going up.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really, really smart. And I think thinking through where does it make sense to be worried about every little thing and where does it make sense to just put your head down and execute is like
Yeah, there,
that's the art and the skill, right?
there was a book that came out many years ago by Ben Horowitz of Andreessen
Mm,
Horowitz called The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
yeah.
And a lot of it just is the story of the like truly wild, crazy, wicked environment ride that he had building tech companies in the late 90s and early 2000s through like the hyper competition and the mega boom and the crash and everything that was going on in that environment in that era. And one of the striking points that he makes in the book that I think is another version of this is that as he frames it uh, from a leadership perspective, there are wartime CEOs and there are
Mm,
peacetime CEOs.
interesting.
Peacetime CEOs are really good at growing and scaling companies in, now my words for this, in kind environments.
Mm,
They invest in their team, they focus on values, they deepen their culture, they expand and scale their core offerings, and it's wonderfully profitable and successful.
mm,
But not all times are peaceful for all companies. Sometimes you're at war. It's a hyper competitive environment. There's a major competitor that's coming after you. Something big changes in the landscape. And when you're in that environment, the wartime CEOs succeed. The ones who can rally the troops for a near hopeless battle to take on a major competitor who's kicking their backside, but somehow manages to turn the company around and get everyone fired up to create the thing that successfully gets them through this battle. Oh, and by the way, next week a new one is starting. And
Right.
so part of the point he kind of makes in the book is there are peacetime CEOs and wartime CEOs, and one of the troubles that companies get into is, they have a peacetime CEO when the war comes, and they get blindsided and take out the competition. But strikingly, he also makes the point the other version of the problem happens as well, which is
Right.
you take a wartime CEO and you put them in a peacetime company, and they don't grow and scale anything. They keep breaking stuff
Breaking things.
left and
Right.
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 They're
Right.
fight,
Right. Right.
they're finding
Right.
enemies to fight that don't actually exist and aren't there, which to me is why I'm kind of fascinated with this kind and wicked terrain environment framing, because you know kind strategies in a wicked environment can be as bad as wicked strategies in a kind
Yeah.
environment.
That to me is the really important takeaway is like, okay, so the things that would be, and you pointed to this earlier, like it's easier to change the business if you've been profitable. Like, so what are some things that matter? And I'd love to just spend a few minutes as we get close to wrapping up here on clients. So if a client comes in and things just got wicked in their lives, like this could be unrelated to the market. This could be something happened, an insurance claim, a death in the family, a job loss, could be something positive. It could be, let's just mainly focus on negative. Things just, the plan just blew up.
Mm-hmm.
Like the
Not my fault.
tool,
External circumstances, just to be clear.
the tools that, see, this is, that's the tools that we should pull out of we should literally put on a different backpack, right? Like grab a different, it's a different toolbox.
Yeah.
It may be the same like technical tools, like you may still use the same Monte Carlo calculator. It's fine. But the language you're going to use around it, right? So we're in
So
a
what
in
changes
a
for you? I mean, like how
totally.
would your language shift?
Yeah. So first, empathy, right? In a kind environment, we may just be reinforcing data, reinforce but in a wicked environment, we need to, like, somebody's nervous, somebody's scared, the plan just blew up. This is very close to something we recently recorded around scary markets, right? It's still empathy. We with the skills in a wicked environment are things like asking better questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Carefully considering edge cases. Okay, let's look at all this. Let's do a bunch of scenario planning. Let's stress test this,
Yep.
right? If and your range of potential outcomes just widened a whole bunch probably.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be comfortable with the idea that like I don't know. Let's see where the edges of this are, right? The third tool, so two, like asking better questions, considering edge cases, nuance in edge cases. And the third thing I think that's really important to four, I want to talk about four, is to now you're going to put on a set of lenses. I almost think of them as binoculars. You're going to go up on the watchtower, and after you make a plan of action that may only be a day, a week, a month, like call the bank, get this information, call me back. Or let's see what happens next month when the bonus comes. Like once you've made a plan of action, you're going to climb up on the watchtower with your goggles, your binoculars, and you're going to actively, and this is a very important posture, actively look for disconfirming evidence. Like you're no longer looking for confirming evidence, confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
You're actively on the, for those of you listening, I'm actually putting binoculars up to my eyes and looking out over the landscape.
No, no,
You're
no.
act,
For those of you listening, he's got hand goggles up to his
yeah,
eyes, and
goggles,
he's pretending are
goggles.
binoculars, which is much more entertaining than actually having
Which is why
binoculars.
you should all be on YouTube. So you're actively, and you're not hiding from disconfirming evidence. You're actively looking like, okay, I'm probably wrong here because the range of outcomes got really wide all of a sudden. So I'm probably wrong. I just don't know how yet. So I'm going to look for it. And disconfirming evidence will actually be greeted with sort of good news because it will help correct you to where the range of outcomes. So, and then the last thing is anywhere you can. I call it a flight to simplicity. Anywhere you can, you make things simpler. Like, hey,
Mm.
that thing you were thinking about doing. Oh, we were going to buy a new house. Okay, could we not buy the new house? Where could we not get the new car? Could we not even sign up for the new Netflix subscription? Like anywhere we can, we're going to try and make things simpler for a little bit.
Mm.
Because when you're in when complexity goes up, you want to get out of complex terrain to the degree
Okay.
you can. And there's only certain things. Like remember,
Right. The
effective
avalanche
diversification.
is coming, just like get off the trail, get off the mountain, like
Get
go
out of big mountains.
go
Get to simpler
sideways, right? You
place.
don't go
Yeah,
down the hill faster. I'm assuming and knowing actually nothing about avalanches, but like
fair enough.
you
Like
don't go
pretty
down the
close.
hill faster. You go sideways and get
Get
out of
to a
what's coming up behind
ridge.
you.
Get to a ridge. Get into a forest. Get to safe terrain. Forests aren't always safe, but generally, a disclaimer. So you look for ways, and then remember there's this great term around residual risk. I love residual risk, right? Like you're going to try and reduce inherent risk,
Hmm.
and then always remember you've still got this pile of residual risk left
Right.
over. And that residual risk now, hopefully, you may have been able to cut it down by 10%. Maybe if you're lucky, you cut it down by more by flying to the flight to simplicity. So those are the kind of operating procedures when you're like, oh no, Mr. and Mrs. Client,
Right.
like things just got uncertain. The plan just blew up. Let's empathy, and now let's go to work. And that's a, I don't love the analogies around war, but that's a wartime operation,
Yep.
right? Which I think is actually a very effective analogy versus a peacetime operation.
And so then just one question I've got left as we come to the end. It's just you know, I don't know. Does any of this show up in the language and conversation with clients when you're dealing with someone who's been operating in the wicked terrain and don't realize it, right? It's the
Mhm. Yeah.
you know the person who skied the out of bounds slope 10 times without an avalanche is like it's totally safe. You're like, no, it's literally
Yeah.
avalanche terrain.
Yeah.
Like it's not
Yeah.
safe, right? And it's the clients again, just I tend to come back to the investment context, right? They bought some things, they went up a lot. Therefore, I'm an investing genius. They don't say it like that, but they become really resistant to advice around things like diversification because they believe they're in a kind environment. I'm following the rules. I bought the thing, it went up, I got immediate feedback. The pattern is going to repeat.
Mhm.
And they're not in that
Just setting themselves up for a
environment.
much bigger, yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. This is a I've been having this conversation a lot over the last couple of years around risk because it's my favorite topic, and specifically with um, people who take big risk in the mountains and the markets. So both the mountains and the markets. And the question that we almost that comes back all the time is like, is there any way to get somebody to know it without experiencing it?
Yep.
Like, can I tell the 25-year-old
Yeah.
without like either getting caught in one or
I'm
having one come close? And
as as
it's
a
so
parent
hard.
who's told their children a lot of things that they shouldn't do that they continue to do anyways. I'm not optimistic on where you're going with this.
Yeah, as a 53-year-old child who has been told by a million times by my wife not to play football with the 22-year-olds, and I still come home with torn hamstrings. So I know this feeling. So the answer is, man, it's really hard. Like you see this with cigarette advertisements, like the pictures, like graphic images can do something. But I think the better way to think about this is how could you create safe to fail experiments, not fail
Mm.
safe, not fail safe, because that's a
Oh,
totally different thing.
okay.
Safe to fail environments,
So, okay, you want to own the thing? Like, let's put it in an unmanaged
classic.
account. You can put a couple percent into it, do your thing. I'll handle your safe money that you can't afford to lose for your retirement. And you do the thing you want to do with a portion that you can afford to take some risk with.
Yeah, that's a classic one. The problem is that could go quote unquote right for them, wrong for you a couple of
Correct. Then
times,
you do the thing and it goes up a ton. They're
two or
like,
three
see, I'm
times. They're like,
smarter
yeah,
than
see, I'm going to
you.
do it again. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. So another way to do that would be, and I think we talked about this maybe in a recent episode around different people creating different tools for data visualization. Like we could literally say, like you could create an experiment where you're like, hey, let's go back you don't even have to say this. You could say, hey, before you do that, could we just play a little game? Let me give you, you know, like we could create an environment where we go back 10 years so we know what happened
Yeah.
and say choose, right? We could create the small day trading account, which we always do. I think the day trading account idea, I'm just calling it day trading account idea, you would want to set up real strict rules around like, hey, let's keep that at a certain percent. And guess what? If it goes well, you can peel some of that off and rebalance back into your account and keep it at the small percentage.
Mhm.
Chances of them following that rule, pretty, we both know, pretty challenging. I mean, you and I have been through this
Little
because
easier if you
we,
set it up in advance. Right.
yeah, it will be at least easier, at least more possible. You and I have lived through the crappy risk tolerance era, risk
Hmm.
tolerance questionnaire era,
Hmm.
where there was like, and again, these were generic. I'm not talking about any
Yep.
specific brand of risk tolerance. It was just you and I lived through the invention
Yep.
of risk tolerance questionnaires. And we got exactly what we're talking about here is misleading feedback because
Right.
when you've been through a period of low volatility, high returns, and somebody takes a risk tolerance, a crappy designed risk tolerance questionnaire, they literally are saying, what risk? What are you talking about? This is amazing. And then you have the same person take the same questionnaire after a 30% drop, and they're like, get me the cash.
Yep. Which to me isn't actually a risk tolerance questionnaire problem per
Yeah.
se. It's like it's their perceptions, right? They change their understanding of what kind of environment they're in, right? A super risk adverse person who believes they found a stock that'll go up 25% a year without fail would still buy it. It's just like a
Yeah.
25% bonds. Like, why buy a 4%
This
bond when
is
you can buy a
amazing.
25% bond? Like it just right? They're thinking the wrong game, but like that's not a tolerance issue. That's like, do you know what kind of environment you're in? And I think vice versa as
Totally.
well. Like, you could be totally risk tolerant. If you think the market's going to zero, you still go to cash. I mean, if you
Yeah,
really think
that's
it's going to
yeah.
zero, you go to cash.
Yeah, that's well stated. That's why I think this is really important. I actually I think understanding the landscape
Yeah.
because that's where I wrote that manifesto that you cannot buy that we hand out all over the place is around like you're a guy, you're not a defender of an outdated a real financial planner is not a defender of an outdated map. They're a guide in a changing landscape.
Hmm.
And I think when we understand the changing landscape, and
Well, and
sometimes the landscapes are not changing. Like you could think of like your well, see, even that, right? I was just going to say your government pension,
yeah. Well,
but his
I
go ahead.
think then you frame it well to say that one of the values of being a financial planner is a guide in a, call it, potentially changing landscape. And the fact that we as an advisor can help clients realize when they're changing landscapes and how to navigate. It's a version of, the company needs someone to make them realize you're heading into wartime. You might want to swap out the peacetime CEO or vice versa. That
Yeah.
helping clients navigate potentially changing terrains is part of the value proposition.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think where I would maybe wrap with that idea is just like maybe thinking of them as two separate toolboxes.
Yeah. Yes.
And they might even be like the same tools, quote unquote. Like there might be a hammer in both, but it's like
Yep.
how you use it is the tool.
Yep.
Like your posture, your language, your certainty. And I think you're emphasizing process and adaptability
Yes.
over predictions and perfect plans.
Yep.
And I think to be fair, the earlier in the engagement that we start using that kind of language, like this is a process, this is about general resilience, you're in the ballpark, and the less certainty we sell, the better we set ourselves up for what you called earlier life. I think it was
Yep.
just like reality, right? So I
Yep.
think that's just think of it as a toolbox. And I guess what I'd lead with is just start asking yourself questions every once in a while. Oh, geez,
Yeah.
what environment is this? What kind of environment is this? So you just start practicing noticing, because then you can pull the right toolbox down.
Yep. I like it. I like it, Carl. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers, Michael.
Cheers.